Thank you everybody for joining us here today. What we're going to go through today is really we want to focus on how we use the PredictWind Offshore App when we're on passage. But before we get to that, we will cover off a couple of things. So we will talk about polars because that's the speed of our boat. We want to quickly run through that. We'll quickly talk about how we set up our GPS tracking. Then we will go into the Offshore App and we will do a pre-departure route where we'll get everything, and we'll go through that quickly, and then we will much more slowly go through what we would how we would use the Offshore App while we're at sea, and we'll do a couple of iterations of that so that we can get a really good feel for it and give you some idea of how I would use it and possibly how you would use it when you're offshore. And then we will just have a quick look at GPS tracking again at the end, because that's something that you can use in the Offshore App to see where other boats are. So I will jump into a screen share, and very quickly, I know that we've mentioned this before, the models we have ECMWF, Spire, UKMO. I would consider these to be the top three offshore. ECMWF and Spire, through the studies we've done, show better accuracy than all the others for offshore passages. The UKMO is considered to be the number 2 global model behind ECMWF for a national weather service. Spire is a private service, so we don't see that. All of those models, PredictWind pays for the data to get and give to you. And then we have the GFS model, the PWG and the PWE. PWG and PWE are the models that we run ourselves, and they are very good at with the high resolution, so day of and next day stuff. They're hard to beat there. But offshore, we're really looking at consensus between all the models, and we know that these, the big three over here are very good for what we want to do with this type of passage that we're looking at. How do we see this information? So when we are onshore, we use the PredictWind app. It has a huge amount of information in it. We will look at the PredictWind website shortly. And doesn't matter which, you can use either of these pieces of software with your subscription. In the PredictWind app, you can do weather routing, you can set up your polars, you can set up your GPS tracking, you can do your forecasts when you're at the marina. It does need a cellular or Wi-Fi connection, and but a really powerful piece of software, and something that you should be using when you're at home at the marina and doing a coastal trip. What we're really going to talk about today is the Offshore App. This is what we use when we're going offshore, when we're going out of cell phone range. Even if it was on a day trip, we might use this because it saves all our data offline. The data is viewed as in GRIB format. GRIB is just a method of transferring the weather data. And we have, you can do your weather routing in there and everything else that you want to. We'll talk about this a lot, and we will go straight into talking about polars. So this is sort of really where we get started today. So we want to, for our boat, we want to know how fast the software thinks our boat's going to go. So for that, we use what are called polars. Polars are a table version of our boat, how fast our boat's going at a chosen wind angle and a chosen wind speed. So I've come in here, I'm in the PredictWind website, forecast.predictwind.com, where I can look at all sorts of stuff. I've come in down here to tools, to weather routing, and I'm in weather routing here, and I'm going to click on routing preferences. And this is where I'm going to set up my polars. And so this is sort of a really early on in the piece thing. I do this when I've probably first got PredictWind. And if you're doing your trip in a month, you'd be getting it now so that you can set this stuff up and have a play around. The great thing about doing this in the Predict Wind app is that we can just quickly do downloads. We can look at the results and see what our polars, what output the router thinks our polars are giving. So you see here, we're in routing preferences, and we've got boat types. We've got predefined, power, sail, and advanced. Predefined is this here, this list. And I can go through this list and I can choose my boat. There's a lot of boats in here. I can choose my boat or any other boat that might have similar performance to mine. And I can try that out and see what the polar looks like. You see over here, we've got a polar curve. So, you know, this is the degree, the true wind angle that you might be sailing at. And these, as we go further out, that's the increase in wind speed and boat speed as we go out. You know, we won't get too into that. What the important thing is here is to choose your polar, select the polar for your boat or a similar boat, and then run the weather routing and see what it looks like. So we're not going to stay in here. I want to go straight into the Offshore app because, oh no, sorry, we're going to go into GPS tracking. But we can adjust our polars from within the Offshore app. So we'll look at that when we come to do our downloads. And but first of all, we'll just click over here to GPS tracking. If you're doing an offshore passage and you've got someone else that you're going with, you could create a tracking group, and you could put your name in here and call it whatever you wanted. Or if you're in a rally and you want to choose that rally, you can select it in here. And so you see I've chosen the coastal and offshore cruising rally. They are an organisation running rallies between New Zealand and Fiji and back and around the Pacific. So anyway, I've put, they don't know, but I've put myself in their rally. We will see what that looks like shortly. We are going to stop sharing this and we are going to go to another screen share. So here we are in the Offshore app. So this is the app that has the icon of a globe and the little start and finish waypoint dots. Just to be clear, the stuff that you will see in here is in the Offshore app. There's some data that you get in the Offshore app that you don't get in the Predict Wind app. The menu looks different. So if you're not seeing this menu, you're probably in the Predict Wind app, not the Offshore app. I saw some questions come in about that after our webinar last week. So make sure you're in the right app. Offshore app can run on a Mac, a PC, an iOS device, so an iPhone or an iPad, or an Android tablet, and a Chromebook. But so for Android, so your Android phone, whether you've got a Samsung or your tablet. So they will all run the Offshore app. Newer the better. Newer devices always work better than old ones. It's just the way software goes. Today we're looking at it on my Mac. I have a Mac laptop. I could use an iPad, and I do use an iPad myself when I'm out sailing, but it's easier to present on Zoom with the Mac version. So you will see today that the menus in the iPad or the tablet version look slightly different, but the functionality is the same. And I'll just mention that a couple of times as we go through. Yes, it may look slightly different, but you're doing all the same stuff. So we are sitting in port, and we have decided that we're going to leave today and we're going to go on our passage. We could talk about departure planning, but that's a whole other webinar in itself. But so we're happy with our weather window. Obviously, we're looking at a very long passage, so we need to look at the big picture stuff and do our best there. Anyway, we're going to leave now. So what I've done here is I have got I'll just change this. This is a wave map we're looking at, by the way. I'll just change this over to a wind map so everyone feels a bit more familiar. And you'll see here, I've actually gone through and run this before we start the webinar. But you see, I've got my green start waypoint here, where we start. And we'll come back to that in a second. And I've got my red destination waypoint over there. and I'm happy with all that. And I'm going to press download over here. So we're going to go through this part quickly, and then we will move our start waypoint and we'll go through it much more slowly, and we will do that as if we were on an SSB or an Iridium Go connection. So I'm just going to click on download. I'm in port. I've got a solid Wi-Fi connection. I can get as much data as I want. And so I'm going to do that for two reasons. Obviously, I want more information, the better. And so if I can, when I can, get as much information as I can, I'm going to get it. Anything that I don't replace here when I'm offshore will still be there. So for instance, I'm going to get, you'll see here, I've chosen all my parameters. I've got everything. GMDS is the whole lot. But you'll see here, I have got ocean data and I'm going to download it. Ocean data is a professional subscription feature. You'll see here, if I turn this off, it dramatically changes our file size. So we're going to talk a lot about file size today. This is my estimated file size down here, and we're going to talk about this a lot in our next download. So we've come in here, we've selected everything. I want to get this ocean data now because it is too big a file for me to get when I'm at sea. The good thing is, if I'm on the Pro sub, it will be calculating in my weather route. You'll see here, I've got satellite imagery and I've got GPS tracking. So I'm in my rally group. I'm downloading the latest GPS tracking data before I leave, so that when I'm at sea, I'm only updating the position, so which keeps my file a lot smaller. I come over here, I click next, and you'll see here that this has popped up and it says RTOFS global currents. The requested area is too large. That's cool with me. I've chosen a massive area, and you'll see here it was 61 megabytes is our estimated size. So that's too big an area, and we will talk about how to adjust that area shortly. And you'll see here also the observations, too big an area. And so, yeah, we will look at how we adjust that. So I'd click on download all, and all these would download. I've already done that. So let's say, well, before we do that, so we've downloaded everything. We've got all this information here. We can scroll through the timeline and we can look at our route and we go, okay, that's cool. We do have a bit of a split here. I mean, the reality is that they both want us to head southwest. And if I look at this time slider down here, we haven't in 12 hours. In fact, it's about 8 hours before my next model run. I would have got to about here before I download again. So I don't need to make too critical a decision. What I would do here is I would be sailing this direction that my boat likes. If I click through the different weather models here, you would see there's ever so slightly different wind directions in the models. So whichever one was matching up with my routing, that's the route that I would be taking. I can come over here into my tables and my wind summary, and you will see the true wind angle is pretty deep. So whichever, we're on Port Jibe and we're sailing pretty deep. So 160 true wind angle. So that's what I would do. I would be on port and I would be sailing pretty deep at that true wind angle. And when it came to my next model runtime update, so that's an important thing, and I'm sure someone from the support team can put the model update times on there, and I'll show you again where we can see it in here in a minute. But we would just sail to here. Let's say that we've sailed to hit this point here, and we're now at sea. We don't have cell connection anymore. We're on satellite. So what we want to do, I'll just zoom out a bit. And so we've set our position. How do we set our position? I'll just move my zoom controls there. when I move this green start waypoint, you'll see my lat long is changing up here. If I have an Iridium Go, there will be a little white dot on the screen, not too dissimilar to those, but smaller. And I can actually just move my green start waypoint to that position. If not, I can just get the lat long from my chart plotter and I can type it in here so that we have the right position for where we are. So I've got my position. I've put it in my box there, and I am going to come up here and I'm going to click on Grib. And why am I going to do that? If I'll zoom out a bit, and you'll see here that as I move this start waypoint like that, you'll see this box, this white box is moving. And what this white box is, this is my Grib area, and I can adjust this by grabbing these corners. And so I'm at C. I'm on my Iridium Go connection. I need to control my file size. So you'll see here, I'm just going to quickly come in here and click on download, and I'm going to go through here, and I'm going to turn this off. I'm going to turn my ocean data off because it'll be in my weather routing because I've got my Pro sub. But what I want to be able to show you, the reason I'm turning that off is so that when we move this box around, I want you to be able to see that over here, my estimated file size is changing. So we'll talk about what a good file size might be soon. But see, as I move this box, that number is changing. So I want to know a bit about this weather behind me. I want to know what's going to be in front of me for the next short while. And so I've got quite a small grip area here, and you might be like, but I'm going the whole way across the Atlantic. You know, what are you thinking? And so what I'm going to do is I'm going to get my details for what I'm doing for the next couple of days, what the weather looks like for the next 3 days, for instance. And that's this area here. That's what's happening to me now. That's what I want to know about. My weather routing will go the whole way across. So we're going to have data for out here, and we can actually do a second download if we want to later, where we can cover a much bigger area, but we'll change all our parameters. So I've set this area here. I'm pretty happy with that. I'm going to come over here when we've got our start position correct there. And then come over here and I'm going to click on download. Now we have our estimated file size here, 657 kilobytes. That is probably, not probably, that is too big for my Iridium Go. That file size is too big. So what do I do? I mean, I've made my area smaller. How do I work this out? Well, as we mentioned before, we're looking at the next few days of weather for this download. So what we're going to do is we're going to change our days. We're going to go 3 days, and all of a sudden you'll see this comes down to 287 kilobytes. I'm at 50 kilometer resolution. For now, we'll leave it at that. I could flick over to 100. The reason being that we're not fussed about our resolution too much is that our weather router will be using the highest resolution it can, because the weather route is actually calculated on the PredictWind servers. So we don't need to worry about getting gribs for this whole area, because the route is run on the PredictWind servers and then sent back to me on my via my satellite connection and straight into the Offshore App. So we've got 3 days of weather that we're going to look at. We've got our time step here. I could change that to 12 hourly, and you see that my 24 hourly and my file size comes down a bit more. I don't think we need to do that. I mean, either or. So just so that you know that the output from the models is generally at 3 hours steps. So what's happening between those steps is the software is interpolating it. So if it's 10 knots at 3 hours and it's 20 knots at 6 hours, halfway in between, it thinks it's 15. So that's what it's doing there. Have a play around with it. It's actually quite hard to tell. Even when you go to 24 hourly, the software does a very good job of guessing what's happening in between by putting those data points together and meshing them in between. The grids that we're using here, when we're looking at the grids, they are just giving us a visual of what our weather routing is telling us. The weather routing is the primary data source. So we're going to leave all the models turned on. We could turn some off if we wanted to, and especially if we see our weather route is, the routes are all showing, they're all going the same way, then we may not need all the models. But for now, let's just leave them on. And you see here, I've got my other parameters. I've got wind, pressure, rain, wave, gust, cape, temperature, and cloud. Let's just turn a couple off and see what happens. Our file size gets a bit smaller. 247. This is still a big download, but it's very doable for the go. You would want to go away and make a coffee while it did it, but very doable. Let's leave it on for now. We can always flick back. Why do I like these particular parameters? Well, wind and pressure. I mean, obviously wind we want to know about. Pressure, I want to be able to see highs and lows. Rain, I want to be able to see if there's any frontal bands. And so rain will show me that. Wave, I could turn it off because I've got wave in my weather routing tables. And so I could turn that off, and you'll see if I turn that off, we get a bit smaller. Let's leave it on for now. Gust, we haven't analyzed this route much, so I'm going to leave it on just in case to see if we've, what we're like, what the difference is. We can also see that in the tables though, in the weather routing. So again, we don't have to have it, but it's a nice to have for now. CAPE, convective available potential energy, the amount of energy in the atmosphere. For the moment, we'll leave that on. I want to see it to see if there is anything nasty. Are we going to, let's say that we left this morning, it's coming into evening, I'm downloading my weather. I want to see if we've got the potential for any thunderstorms tonight. We might change how we're going to sail tonight if we see that in our forecast. But once again, all of these things, I can see all of this in my weather routing. In here, we have we can choose weather routing, departure planning, destination forecast. Destination forecast will be for our red dot. Let's say we were at a remote island and we just wanted a forecast for that spot. We can use destination forecast. Departure planning, again, that's before we go on our passage. We're just looking at weather routing. Our start time is now. If I was going to leave tomorrow, I was back in port, I could change this time to time in the near future. So this little wheel over here is our weather routing preferences. So in your iPad or your tablet, it will actually be called weather routing preferences. So it's actually a line that you press on, and you will open up this box here, and you have your preferences. So why do we want to look at this? Well, we can change our polars and other settings. So you'll see here, I've got my polar set at 110%. So what does that mean? That means that I want to go, well, that I sail faster than my polar. I'm sailing 10% faster than my polar. Let's say I was a bit gung-ho because I had too much sail up and I blew out my favorite sail, a head sail or something. Maybe I've been running the kite and my wife's had enough of me and sailing like I'm in a race, and I've I've blown it out. I've trawled it. There's tension. We're going to sail a bit slower now, and be a bit more sensible. We've got a big trip ahead, and so we're going to change that to 90%. So we're actually 10% slower than our polar speed now. You'll see here we've still got our polar in here. We could change it, but we don't really need to be changing that now. But here we have our motoring setting. So I'm going to motor at 6 knots when the boat speed is less than 3 knots. That's actually pretty slow, but I like sailing. So I'm only going to motor if I really have to. Obviously, we want to keep our average speed up. We don't want to sit around in no wind, and so the weather router will take this into account. I can change which current model I was using for pro users, and that's calculating in my route. Probably not the super high on the importance level for this passage, but if I was coming out of the US, going to the Caribbean, I would 100% be super important. So depending on where you're sailing, what passage you're doing, these ocean currents can be critically important. You're coming across the Gulf Stream, 100% you have to have that. There's nothing more to it. So I'm just going to close out of here. And so we're happy with all our settings in there now. We've turned our polar down because I was a bit silly. We've got GMDS. We always want to get GMDS. It's a very small file size. So you see if I turn this off, hardly changes our file size, it's tiny. So we want to get that because it's information from a meteorologist in a text format. We want that information. It's really good. I could get some observations to see how the observations compare to the grid data. I don't really need it because I know that my routes are quite similar, so the grids are all saying the same thing. Chances are they're going to be doing a good job. So I just clicked on next down there, and you'll see here I've got my ocean data turned off because that file would be too big for my Iridium Go. If I wanted to get a really tiny area, I could, but that's not for this. That's not what we're doing in this webinar. Satellite imagery, I'm not going to get it, just personal preference. And also, if there was something, if I read the GMDS forecast and it said there's a hurricane developing over here or some sort of system or some sort of weather warning, and I wanted to see that, that where that was and that was developing, I could get it and have a look at the satellite imagery. Personally, I'm not a super fan of it myself, so I don't use it. And then anyway, GPS tracking, I want to be able to see where my mates are in my rally or my buddy boat that I'm they might be 100 miles away, but they're still my, we're doing the passage together essentially. And you'll see here, I now have a file size of 150, estimated file size of 154 kilobytes. I'm going to click on next. And you will see here, we have all our estimated file sizes. So that's great. So this is where we want to look at our connection. So at the moment I'm on web, and that is what we will do our download on, because otherwise I'll disappear off the webinar, but we'll just click through these. So the Iridium Go, let's say I've got my Iridium Go on board and I've got my external antenna. We can do a direct download with the Iridium Go. So we don't need to do an email request or anything. It's as though we're on the web. It's just much slower. And that's why we've had to control our file size. And no matter what connection we're on, we want to control our file size, because at this time in the world, satellite data at sea is still very expensive. And but we've got this great solution with the Iridium Go. If we had an Iridium 955 phone, for instance, we might have an optimizer, which allows us to also do direct downloads in a similar fashion to what we would on the Iridium Go. Global Star, obviously another satellite service. satellite. This is if I had a much faster satellite connection, I would use this connection type. Again, I still might, if I had a KVH or whatever it is, some high-end pilot satellite system, whatever it is, you can use it with this software. I still might have an optimizer, or I might have it plugged in directly. Depends on what your setup is. I can also do an email. So this is if I had an SSB connection, I could save this request, I could send it off and get the data back, assuming that my service allows me to send attachments. But this file size wouldn't be unreasonable for that either. Maybe a bit on the big side, but again, we can condense that down. You could start dropping models off and all sorts of things. So lots of ways to get it. You just need to be able to you need a satellite connection that can transfer data. So an example of something that can't transfer data would be an inReach. Cannot transfer data. It can do what's called short burst data, which is it can just like send a text message basically. Can't transfer it to a data transfer. We're going to come back here to web. Before we do that, we would, if we were on our Iridium Go, I would come up here and I would choose the network type. I would choose Iridium. It might say Iridium 9528 or whatever. I would select that connection type, same if I was on my iPad or tablet, because obviously my device needs to be connected to my satellite device. So we're in here and we're going to click on download all. So we're going to download all these files. So if I was on my Iridium Go, it wouldn't be happening this fast, but that doesn't matter because I have an unlimited data connection on my Iridium Go. So I can go away, I can make a coffee. You can tell I'm a coffee drinker, can't you? I'd make a coffee, and while this was downloading, I could just sit back. I need to make sure the screen is open. I can't have my computer or my tablet shutting down. The screen does need to stay open. And then I would, or does it still? I think it does. And I could come back. If the connection dropped while I was away, it would just start again. It has the software has what's called a mid-file restart. So let's say it was halfway through here, it would just start again from that point. It's not going to try and download it all again. So it's pretty clever, and it does some great stuff there. So something important we want to look at here, update time. What does this mean? This is when these grids were updated. So this is how we know when our grid update times are. So you'll see here that they all updated at slightly different times. The PWG, this is all in my time here in New Zealand. So whichever time your computer is set at, that is what time will be displayed here. So it tells you when these grids are updated. So this is from this morning's model run. So in 12 hours time this evening, we will see this happening, and you'll see Spire was actually the last to update at 9 o'clock this morning, my time. So it's only 10:30 or whatever it is now. Yeah. But you'll see they started updating at 5 o'clock. So between 5 and 9, they updated. I would wait till after 9 to make sure everything was updated, and so that I can get all new data after the next model run. So then I've got the freshest data. That's very important because the new model run is it's completely independent of the one before. It's got all that new initial conditions data has been fed into the model. If you want to know what I'm talking about there, we did a webinar a few weeks ago on models, and we talk about how all that stuff works. So we've got all that, we've downloaded it. You'll see over here, I've got my ticks, my green ticks. That means that it's successfully downloaded. These blue bars have come across. We're happy. I'm going to close that. My Iridium Go would have automatically disconnected. And then I'm going to come over here. And so you'll see here, I've got my tables. You sort of look at that and you're like, oh, what is all this? So probably something that I mentioned at the start about weather models, about polars, is that we can see true wind speed, true wind angle, speed over ground. Okay, so when I'm want to know whether my polars represent what how I actually sail the boat, how fast the boat actually goes. Is this correct? In 15 knots at 135 true wind angle, does my boat do 6.5 knots? Sounds very likely to me, very reasonable. So I'm happy with that. I mean, we look down here and we see it's doing 12 knots. I mean, that's a pretty hot angle. I have got a catamaran. 13 knots, yeah, pretty quick, but just depends. You would know whether your boat goes that fast or not, but that's a pretty high average there. And we could, this is why we play around with our polars before we leave, because that top end stuff, we might want to knock that down a bit to make it more realistic. Doing 13 knots in a cruising vessel could be pretty interesting. I don't have a 47-foot cat myself, so might be very possible. Anyway, we can see all our averages in there. The other important thing that we can see up here is we can see what our polar is. We can see what our percentage is that I changed before because I blew out my and I've got my motoring setting on and which current model I'm using. I can look at different things in here. As I mentioned before, I may not need to download the wave grid because all this information is actually in the weather routing, the height, the direction, the period, and I can actually see that on the map. So we've got a bunch of different things in here. If I wanted to export my route, I could select one and I could export that into a piece of navigation software if I so wished. Personally, I wouldn't do that. I would choose some key waypoints and I would just sail to those key waypoints, maybe one at 6 or 12 hours and one at 24 just for reference. That's how I would do it. So people, there's also a graphical version of this if you want to look at that. Depends what sort of visual you like. Most people love looking at maps. So we've started our route. We're out at sea. We've successfully downloaded over our satellite connection. You'll see here my route now starts from where we put that point in. This is all gone. We have our grib area that we chose here, and we're just, we're happy. What I like about this is I have 5 weather models all want me to do the exact same thing. So why is that good? Because they all agree. We've got consensus between the models. That's what we one thing that we're really looking for. If we didn't have consensus, we would want to put our head out the boat. What conditions do we have now? Which weather model is closest to what we have? So that one would indicate to me it was doing the best job. You could still do that with these. But I suspect if I flick through these, that we're not going to see huge differences between them. And we're not. There is a bit of variation there, but so we could see, well, which one's closest to what we've got now. If I zoom in on this a bit, we're on the ECMWF. So we've clicked on the black model there, and this boat is on the black route. And so that is this graphical display, wind display that we're looking at here. That is the ECMWF model. If I click on Spire, you'll see my boat changes, and we're looking at that's the wind model that's displaying on the map in front of us. So we can go through all of those, and we can change our view as well. So we've got all these controls in here. There is tutorials that sort of go through all the controls and that sort of thing of what we're looking at there. Let's come back to the ECMWF, and we can have a quick look at our parameters, that we downloaded. Why do I want to do that? Is I want to start sort of, getting a feel for what I'm looking at. So I've got my rain one here. I'm actually going to zoom out another click. Got my rain here, and I don't have any. Now see here, my weather stops. And why does my weather stop? Because I only got 3 days of grids, because I was trying to keep my file size really small. So that's cool. We knew that was going to happen. But what we do have here is our weather route continues and carries on. And that is because the weather route was run on the PredictWind servers. The file size for that was 10 kilobytes. And so it sent that little request off. It said, Nick's here. He's in his Leopard 46. And, he's changed his polar percentage to 90%. He's got his motoring options on. It sent that little packet of data off to the servers, and the PredictWind servers crunched all that data. It might have been 50 megabits of data, and it crunched all that on the PredictWind servers, and it sent it back. This is a really big advantage for of the PredictWind system. If I had to download all those grids, well, I just wouldn't have been able to. If I had to download grids to calculate this weather route, I would need a high-speed satellite connection. I'd be spending thousands of dollars on airtime to be able to get that data, to probably not even do as good a job as what has happened here. So yeah, very cool. It's calculating it right to the end. If I click on this route here, I can see what it is. So I don't need the grid to get that information. It's all in the weather route. It's a super powerful feature that we have in this software. Okay, so I'm going to come back here because we're going to talk a little bit more about now. So I've looked at the rain. I don't see any rain bands. So there's no big wind direction changes there either. So therefore, no frontal bands. I can come over here and I can have a look at the gusts, and I could also see them in tables. If I go back to this wind summary, I could actually see the gusts. So I can see that there's, a bit of difference between my true wind speed and my gusts. I can also visualize this on the map. And we always want to keep an eye on stuff like this. If we see a big difference between the average, so when we look at this, when we look at wind, when we're here, we are looking at an average wind speed. So gusts can be 40% more or more even. And so we just need to keep that in mind. Someone might say, oh, the forecast was wrong. It said it was, what does it say here? 15 knots or whatever. But it wasn't. It was 23. And it's like, well, yes, that's possible. Did you look at the gust parameter? We see here, we have, 16 knots, 21 knot gusts. I can zoom right in there and we can click around on the map and just sort of see the situation there. So 17 knot average, 22 knot gusts. I can, and I can look through the different models at that. And as I mentioned just before, we can look at the tables. Cape, this is what I wanted to look at, because this might indicate to me that we've got, something nasty coming. I'm just going to click on that to make that go away. Oop. And you see here, we do actually have some elevated cape levels. We did see there that we did have a reasonable variation between our average and our gusts. We've got some higher cape levels here. Not super high, but it's not nothing. So this could be a warning. We've got potentially 22 knot gusts. We've got some cape. Would we potentially sail with a reef in tonight? Would we go less than what we would normally have? Would we be a little bit more cautious? Possibly. because this is indicating that there could be some instability in the air. Not the worst situation I've ever seen, but definitely indicates there's something there. And just to back that up, we can actually have a look at another weather model. But why do we have all these weather models? Because no one weather model is always right, and it's just simply dangerous to rely on one weather model. So you'll see here we have got, the GFS model has a slightly different take on it to the EC. So yeah, if I was going into the night, I had 16 to mid 20s in the gusts. I've got Cape. I would sail more conservatively tonight, just in case there was some thunderstorms rolled in, because that's what this Cape is telling us, is that there's energy in the atmosphere, and we could get that. If it was daytime or even at night, obviously if it's clear and then all of a sudden you see a big cloud bank coming in, be aware something's about to happen. So, that's why we have all these tools. That's why we have all these parameters. That's why you can download this information at sea, because these situations change. So we see there we've got our wave map, and just nice to look at to see what's going on, with our wave. And you can see here, there's actually quite interesting that we've got it behind us here, and then it does start to wrap around. We can change model. Yeah, interesting. Anyway, we can visualize all that stuff and have a very good look. The more you use it, the more comfortable you're going to get with this. So that's our first download. I will very quickly, so I'll just check on the time. Yeah, I'm going to need to start speeding stuff up. I will very quickly do another download. So what I'm going to do is I just want to some of you might have been sitting there going, but I want to see a bigger picture. And so now we can. So what I'm going to do is I am going to pull this grid area out, because I know where my route is. I know what my weather is. I could fiddle around with this and get a much bigger picture if I wanted. Anyway, I'm going to choose this just for the point of an example. So I've changed my grid area. I've come in here, and I am going to turn all these models off. I'm just going to get Spire. I am going to go to 100-kilometer resolution. I'm going to go to 24-hour time step. I'm going to turn off these other parameters. I just want wind pressure and rain. I've just done my weather routing, so I don't need it. So I'm not going to get it. I've already got my GMDS, so I'm not going to get it. And I'm going to go next. I've already done my GPS tracking data. I don't need it. So I'm going to go next. And you see here, I've got 11.5 kilobytes. So I'm actually going to cancel out of there, and I'm going to make this area a bit bigger. Now I've got 21 kilobytes. So let's come in here, download, next. I'll choose my Iridium Go. You'll see here, I've just got that one model that I'm downloading. I'm going to download all. And click close. And you'll see here, we've got, all of a sudden, we can see a big picture. That was a tiny file size. But we've got a grid, a wind grid, and we've got rain for a larger area. And we've got our pressure parameter in there. So I just wanted to show that to you quickly so that you can understand that there's no one solid way that you can use this. You can look at your small area, then you can do a download of a big area with a single model. And so we can have a look at that model. And so we're just getting an overview. Oh, I've only got, what I should have done was get more days. That's that. There we go. So I wanted more days of data because obviously I'm looking at a bigger picture. I want to get more days of data to view visually. So I can just sort of get an idea of what's going on. And I can just play this through. So we're getting to there. I could have chosen more days actually. And I can look at my wind, and I can just so I've got a bigger picture of what's going on. Okay, so we downloaded all this other stuff before, and I just did another download. It's all still there. So we see here we've got our GMDS. I'm not going to spend any time on this because I want to quickly check on GPS tracking, but this is really important. It's a tiny file size. You just need to work out where you are in the scheme of things here. And so you can see if there's any warnings for your area or ahead of you or coming up behind you. Really important that you read this, understand it. We have a really cool development coming up with this that I'm not going to talk about because I might get told off. But yeah, worth getting every time. Get the GMDSS. Ocean data, it's all still in there. So I can look at that because I downloaded that before I left. Ocean data doesn't change very quickly. So I've got that data for quite some time. As you can see, there's parts of the world where it's super critical. It's also very nice to know what's going on out here. You might be like, why have I got this weird wind state, this weird sea state? You can probably look at your currents and understand why. So what we really want to look at here is the GPS tracking. You'll see it's shot me to a different part of the world because that's where my track is. But you'll see here that there is people up in Fiji. There's a gentleman here coming down to New Zealand. There's some other people here just coming into New Zealand. And let's say I was out here. I'm down here. This is me. But let's say I was up here. I could know that this guy is there and I'm here. Or if I'm coming into New Zealand, I know that this person's here, and I can see all of these on the map. So let's say you're doing a crossing and there's lots of boats. You can actually see them all. You can know that there's people out there, and we can. If you have a predict wind tracking page, you can select people that are around you, or you add your friends, or if you're in a rally, you can do that. If you're in a rally that has YB tracking, we can integrate with YB. We actually sell a YB tracking product, the YB3i, and we can track those devices. But if you're in a rally and the rally organizer gives us permission, we can integrate that into the Offshore app so that you can see everybody in the rally in the Offshore app. Usually it's just a matter of saying to your organizer, can you do this please? And we will and give us permission to have that data feed, and bang, it happens. So that's really cool to be able to see those people out at sea. And as I mentioned at the start, our support team is always there to help you out. We pride ourselves on having top-notch support. The people answering your questions have sailed around the world multiple times. They know what it's like to be out there, and they're a great resource, and they're very nice people. So always be kind to them. So I think that's pretty much it. Cool. All right. Well, thank you everybody for joining us today. It's been a pleasure. I really hope you've learned something. As I said, a pleasure. And please reach out to us with any questions you have. And thank you for joining us.